Backpackers often carry gear that looks helpful, but actually makes the entire trip harder. More weight, more fiddling, less energy when you need it. Today we're fixing that by looking at the items that feel useful, but don't earn their place on trail. A lot of backpacking discomfort comes from carrying gear that feels justified but doesn't actually earn its place. We tend to hold on to certain items because they seem durable or familiar, even when the weight isn't buying us any real comfort. One of the clearest examples is the rigid bottle setup, something like a Nalgene. It looks bomb-proof, and it is, but the real question is whether that durability gives you anything back on trail. Most of the time, it doesn't. Every extra ounce will eventually make itself known through increased fatigue, elevated heart rate, and slower miles. And you don't just feel it on the first mile, it compounds the longer you hike. And once that fatigue settles in, every climb starts feeling a little steeper and every break gets a little longer, all because a few pieces of gear never justified their weight. After 300 plus nights in the backcountry, I've learned that some items just don't earn their place. And a lightweight bottle, even something as simple as a smart water, keeps the function and cuts the load. They're durable enough for most normal trips, they come in useful sizes, and they pair perfectly with inline filters. Nalgenes are legitimately tough, and if someone prefers them for their own reasons, that's valid. But for most beginners, shedding unnecessary weight improves comfort far more than carrying an indestructible bottle. And that's the real point. Gear should improve your comfort or efficiency. If it adds weight without doing that, it's holding you back. And those items are the easiest wins to replace. There's a type of backpacking gear that feels essential simply because it shows up on every beginner checklist online. Rain covers are a perfect example. They look like an obvious solution for keeping your pack dry, but they rarely address the actual way water gets into your gear. Most of the moisture comes through the seams, the pockets, the zippers, or just from throwing wet items into your pack while you're scrambling during a storm. And a rain cover doesn't stop any of that. I mean, yes, a rain cover will keep the exterior of your pack a little drier, but they're not reliable for protecting your actual gear, and many of them weigh around 6 ounces. I ditched the rain cover nearly 5 years ago and switched to an ultralight interior pack liner. They're cheap, easy to get, you can even just use a trash compactor bag, and they weigh almost nothing. And the advantage is they keep everything in your pack bone dry in any weather. Now, if you use an interior liner, you do need to make sure that the gear stored outside the main compartment is protected too. And a couple small dry bags take care of that easily. And even if you do stick with a pack cover, just be aware that a strong gust of wind can rip it right off, and accessing your pack while wearing one is surprisingly awkward. It's a good reminder that not every solution actually solves the problem, and sometimes the simpler system works far better. And that brings us to another type of overrated gear, items that feel responsible but don't actually match the conditions that most people hike in. These are the pieces that come from fear, marketing, or generic checklists instead of real backpacking experience. A major category of overrated backpacking gear is anything that looks responsible but doesn't match the realities of a normal weekend trip. And first aid is where this goes off the rails the fastest. Beginners walk into an outdoor retailer, assume the safest option is the biggest first aid kit on the shelf, and walk out with a kit designed for scenarios they'll never face on a weekend backpacking trip. Now, quick clarification, I'm not telling anyone to leave medical gear at home. Everyone is responsible for their own safety, and if carrying extra items makes you feel more confident, that's a completely valid choice. The point is that these giant store-built everything kits have almost nothing to do with how backpacking injuries actually happen. They're often loaded with bulky trauma supplies, splints, and tools that most hikers aren't trained to use and won't need on a simple overnighter. Meanwhile, the things that backpackers do rely on, blister treatment, basic pain relief, simple wound care and tape get buried inside all that clutter. The result is classic beginner overkill. More weight, more bulk, and zero increase in real capability. And that's the bigger point. Huge first aid kits are just one example of gear that looks responsible but doesn't match how backpacking actually works. And the goal isn't necessarily to shrink your first aid kit, it's just to stop carrying systems built for imaginary scenarios instead of real ones. Some backpacking gear earns a reputation for being minimalist or efficient, but only performs well when the conditions line up perfectly. And that's where a lot of people get burned. Literally and figuratively. Comfort in the backcountry comes from systems that you can trust in any weather, not gear that demands ideal circumstances to work right. Alcohol stoves are a great example of this gap between reputation and reality. Now, I actually love alcohol stoves, and if you've watched the channel for a while, you already know that, but they're a context-dependent tool, and that's exactly why they end up overrated for many beginners. They're lightweight and dead simple until you factor in wind, uneven ground, or trying to cook in stormy weather. The flame is super exposed, the setup is easy to knock over, and they take a long time to boil. None of this is a deal breaker for experienced hikers, but for someone new to backpacking, these quirks usually show up at the worst possible moment. And that's the real point. When you're cold, tired, or dealing with bad weather, the last thing you want is a finicky system. A basic canister stove removes all that friction. It works the same way every time in almost any condition with almost zero attention required. And reliable gear, it's not always flashy, but it's a massive comfort upgrade. When things get rough, predictable gear is worth far more than saving a couple ounces on paper. And speaking of gear efficiency, there's another kind of overrated gear that hides in plain sight. Items that technically work, but add tiny bits of friction all day long. Some gear doesn't look overrated until you notice how much friction it adds to basic tasks. Hydration bladders are a classic example. They feel efficient because you can sip water without stopping, but the trade-off is how hard they make it to track your water or refill during the day. When you can't see your water level, it's easy to end up rationing too early or running dry without even realizing it. And refilling a water bladder on trail can totally break your rhythm. A full bladder can be a real pain to slide back into a packed backpack. They're heavier than most people realize, and if the seal isn't perfect, you're risking a slow leak into your insulation or even your electronics. But if a bladder genuinely helps you drink more water consistently, there's nothing wrong with using one if you like them. However, a lot of beginners eventually switch to lightweight bottles like the Smart Water we talked about earlier because it removes all that hidden work. You can see exactly how much you have left, you can refill in seconds, and they slide pretty easily into the pocket of your backpack. And when you remove gear that doesn't earn its place, the trip gets easier in ways that don't show up on a spreadsheet. You move cleaner, you make fewer micro adjustments, and save energy for the part of backpacking that actually matters. But I'm curious what other pieces of gear you think are overrated. Drop yours in the comments and I might include them in a future video. And if you want to see the simple upgrades that actually are worth carrying, this next video covers a few cheap changes that make backpacking feel easier. And if you like thinking about your gear this way, feel free to subscribe. I've got a lot more coming. All right, take care out there, and I'll catch you on the trail.